Hello class, I'm Trisha Barboza from BSc3, and for today's video, we have a topic of skin and its structure. So first, we have the origin of skin, and in Latin, they call cutis in skin, and modern Latin is the cutaneous. In English, they add a OUS, and on late 16th century, they call it cutaneous. Yan po. So, the adjective cutaneous literally means of the skin, and from Latin, they called cutis. Yan. So, the skin is the outer covering of the body, and in human, it is the largest organ of the integumentary system. Integumentary system, it is an organ system that composed of skin, hair, nails, and endocrine system. Yan. So, the skin is making up of 12 to 15% of the body weight, and with a surface area of 1 to 2 meter per square. And the skin has up to 7 layers of ectodermal tissue and guards the underlying muscles, bones, ligaments, and internal organs. So, human skin is similar to that of most other mammals, though nearly all human skin is discovered with hair follicles and it can appear hairless. So, the skin is the outermost protective covering. Yan. And the functions of skin are control loss of valuable fluids, prevents penetration of noxious foreign materials and radiations. Yan. Cautions against mechanical shock, regulates heat loss, and transduces incoming stimuli, and its color, odor, and texture allows it to transmit social and sexual signals. Yan. So, we have 3 layers of skin. We have epidermis, dermis, hypodermis, or subcutis. When we say epidermis, the epi is coming from the Greek meaning over or upon, and it is the outermost layer of the skin. So, yan, here, it is epidermis. Yan po, outermost layer of our skin. And the epidermis has 5 regions and can range in total thickness from 0.5 mm eyelid to 1.5 mm on the palms and soles. So, they form the waterproof protective wrap over the body surface, which also serve as a barrier to infections, and it is made up of stratified squamous epithelium with an underlying basal lamina. Yan po. Next is the dermis. So, the dermis is the layer of skin beneath the epidermis that consists of epithelial tissue and cushions the body from stress and strain. So, the dermis is tightly connected to the epidermis by a basement membrane. It also harbors many nerve endings that provide the sense of touch and heat. So, it contains the hair follicles, yan, sa ilalim po, and sebaceous glands, apocrine glands, lymphatic vessels, and blood vessels. So, the dermis contains the blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and apocrine glands. Also, the sebaceous glands. So, the blood vessels in the dermis provide nourishment and waste removal from its own cells, as well as from the stratum basal of the epidermis. Also, the dermis is a fibrous structure composed of collagen, elastic tissue, and other structural components that includes vasculature, nerve endings, hair follicles, and glands. As I said lately, the role of dermis is to support and protect the skin, and the deeper layers assist in thermoregulation and aid in sensation. We have here the 2 layers of the dermis, the papillary layer and reticular layer. So, in papillary layer, we have superficial layer. It lies directly beneath epidermis, houses nerve endings that provide body with sense of touch, pain, heat, cold, pressure, and touch. And reticular layer, or the deeper layer, it contains fat cells, blood and lymph vessels, oil and sweat glands, hair follicles, and arrector pili muscles. So, we have here a diagram of skin. So, as you can see, nasa ibabaw po, yan po, naka-level naman po yung ating epidermis. Yan, yung ating mga buhok dito sa ibabaw, yan po yung tinatawag natin na hair shaft. So, yung mga maliliit na butas po dito sa ating mga balat, yan po yung tinatawag nating pore. And, next is the hypodermis or subcutis. The subcutaneous tissue, or also hypodermis and subcutis, is not part of our skin. So, it is lie below the dermis and the cutis. Its purpose is to attach the skin to underlying bone and muscle as well as supplying it with blood vessels and nerves. It consists of loose connective tissue, adipose tissue, and elastin. So, the main cell types are fibroblasts, macrophages, and adipocytes, or subcutaneous tissue contains 50% of our body fat. Fat serve as padding, insulation of our body. So, add ko lang po dun sa kanyang basic function. The hypodermis is the subcutaneous layer lying below the dermis, and it consists largely of fat. So, it provides the main structural support for our skin, and as well as insulating the body from cold and aiding shock absorption. It is interlaced with blood vessels and so the functions of our skin is protection. It is one of the main functions of the skin, protection from invasion by microbes, chemicals, physical agent, and also our ultraviolet radiation. Yan. It protects our microbes. Functional skin protection. Sensory functions. Free nerve ending in the skin are sensitive to pain, touch, heat, and cold, resulting either voluntary or reflex activities. Yan po yung ating function ng skin. And excretion. Yan is excrete sodium chloride in sweat. Urea when kidney function is impaired. And aromatic substances like garlic and other spices. Yan. Excrete, nilalabas na po yung ating mga dumi sa ating katawan kung sakali may sakit tayo sa ilalim ng ating katawan through pawis or sweat, ilalabas niya. Pag may sakit tayo sa kidney, iniihi po natin yon. And regulation of body temperature. It regulates our body temperature of about 36.9 degrees Celsius with variation of 0.5 degrees Celsius and 0.75 degrees Celsius is one of the important functions of our skin. Yan. Formation of vitamin D also. It fatty substance present in skin. The dehydrocholesterol is converted to vitamin D in presence of UV light from the sun. Absorption. It absorbs some drug with low molecular weight as well as toxic chemicals like mercury. Water resistance. The skin acts as a water resistant barrier so essential nutrients are not washed out of our body. We have here the skeletal system. So, skeletal system is composed of the body's bone and associated ligaments, tendons, and cartilage. So, its function is to support the bones of the legs, pelvic girdle, and vertebral column supports the weight of the erect body. Yan po yung ating legs, pelvic girdle, and vertebral column. It supports our erect body, to erect the body. And the mandible or jawbone supports our teeth. And other bones support other organs and tissues. Next function is to protect. So, the bones of the skull protect our brain. Ribs and sternum is a breastbone, protect the lungs and our heart. Vertebrae protect the spinal cord. And movement, skeletal muscle use the bone as levers to move our body. Next is the reservoir for minerals and adipose tissue. 99% of our body calcium is stored in the bone. and 85% of the body's phosphorus is stored in also in our bone. And adipose tissue is found in the marrow of certain bones. So, what is really being stored in the case? So, hematophysis or blood cell information. All blood cells are made in the marrow of certain bones. So, there are 206 named bones in our human body. Each belong to one of two large groups, the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. When we say axial skeleton, it forms long axis of our body. It includes the bones of a skull, vertebral column, the rib cage. These bones are involved with protection, supports, and carrying our body parts. So when we say appendicular skeleton, bones of upper and lower limbs, and the girdle, shoulder bones, and hip bones that attach them to the axial skeleton. It involves in the locomotion and manipulation of our environment. In bone classification, we have 4 types of bones: the long bones, short bones, flat bones, and irregular bones. So when we say long bones, much longer than they are wide. All bones of the limbs except for patella or kneecap and the bones of the wrist and ankle consist of a shaft plus 2 expanded ends. Your finger bones are long bones even though they are very short. So short bones are roughly cube shaped, and bones of the wrist and the ankle is also the short bones. Flat bones, thin, flattened, and usually a bit curved. Scapulae, sternum or the shoulder blades, ribs, and most bone of our skull. Next is the irregular bones. When we say irregular bones, it is of weird shapes that fit none of the 3 previous classes: vertebrae, hip bones or skull bones, and the ethmoid bones. So bones structure are organ that they compose of multiple tissue types. Bones are composed of bone tissue or osseous tissue, fibrous connective tissue, cartilage, vascular tissue, lymphatic tissue, adipose tissue, and nerves tissue. So all bones consist of dense, solid outer layer known as compact bone and inner layer of spongy bone or a honeycomb of flat, needle-like projection that called trabeculae. So bone is an extremely dynamic tissue. So we have here the muscular system. So the functions of muscular system is excitability, that the tissue can receive and respond to stimulation. Contractibility, the tissue can shorten and thicken. Extensibility, the tissue can lengthen. Length, mahaba. Elasticity, after contracting or lengthening, tissue always wants to return its resisting state. So their functions, the characteristic of muscle tissue enable to perform some important parts or functions, including the movement for both voluntary and involuntary, maintaining posture, supporting soft tissues within body cavities, and maintaining body temperature. So we have here the 3 types of muscle. We have a cardiac, smooth, and skeletal. The human body is comprised of 324 muscles. In bones, we have 206 bones. In when muscles, 324 muscles. Muscles makes up to 30-35% in women and 42-47% in men of body mass. So the characteristics of muscles, the muscle cells are elongated, and contractions of muscles is due to the movement of microfilaments. Also, all muscles share some terminology. So the major muscles are the interior, deltoids, origin, the shoulder girdle, here. Insertion, the humerus. Action, shoulder flexion, shoulder extension, for horizontal shoulder flexion and shoulder abduction. Next is the pectoralis major. Stemon and clavicle. Origin. The insertion is the humerus and ribs. In action, shoulder flexion, horizontal shoulder flexion, upward diagonal flexion, and downward diagonal flexion. The pectoralis minor, the insertion is the scapula. The action is the scapula depression, and the origin is the ribs. Iliopsoas. Pelvis and lumbar vertebrae, femur, and hip flexion. Next is the sartorius. Origin, the pelvis, and action, hip flexion, hip abduction, and hip lateral rotation. Yan po, the quadriceps. Tibialis anterior, rectus abdominis, obliques, bicep brachii, trapezius, tricep brachii. Yan, gluteus maximus in the posterior. Yan, hamstring, 2 joint muscles, 1 joint muscles of the soleus.